Okay. Okay, we are beginning chapter 19 today. Chapter 19 actually continues the discussion from chapter 18, and it's actually going to continue for a while. It's going to develop this discussion for a while. We are discussing the type of love for Hashem which a person can awaken to serve Hashem when the other types of love are not available to him. So what do we mean by the other types of love not being available to him? Meaning love which is produced through your intellect. So in other words, you would be learning and studying and becoming more aware of godliness, and then you would be producing the emotions of love and fear of Hashem. That's one type that we spoke about, the Alter Rebbe spoke about. The other type of love and fear of Hashem is through also an intellectual understanding, but it's not as developed, and it is called a tevuna, a conviction. However, when those two types of love are not available, we started discussing in chapter 18, a very fundamental chapter in Tanya, which is even symbolized by the number Chai, about a love which every single Jew possesses and has as an inheritance from our patriarchs. And this love is a natural love. It's given as a gift. It's like a spiritual gene which we have inherited, and there is no work required on our part. However, it is a hidden love. And today's chapter is going to discuss, the Alter Rebbe will discuss first of all the nature of this love, how it behaves, this love, what it causes a person to be able to do, and also why is it hidden? Why is it hidden? Because if it's such an amazing inheritance, why shouldn't we have access to it all the time, right? Why is it hidden? And we're also going to discuss at the end of the chapter what the element of fear is, fear of Hashem in this love. Because in order to serve Hashem, you need fear and love. So although we're discussing mainly a love, but the love contains also an element of fear, and this chapter will discuss that as well. Okay. The source, as we mentioned in last chapter, the source of this hidden love is the level of Chachma, one of the first of the 10 attributes, the first of the 10 spheres. The level of Chachma is a bridge between the very, very, very high levels beyond the spheres, and also affect the emotions, the intellect and emotions. But essentially, the level of Chachma is beyond our understanding, which is why we learned in last chapter how emunah, faith, comes from this level as well, because faith is also beyond understanding. Okay, so in order to understand the nature of this love, we first have to examine a pasuk which refers to the soul of a Jew, which you may be familiar with. It's mentioned frequently. Ner Hashem nishmas adam, that the soul of a person is compared to a candle. Specifically in this phrase, it's called the candle of God, but that the soul of a person is compared to a flame, compared to a candle. The nature of a flame is that it constantly reaches upwards. Even if you were to turn the candle upside down, the nature of the flame is to constantly defy gravity. And in fact, all the elements in this world are influenced by gravity, except for fire. So the four main elements of the world, which are earth, water, air, and fire, are all of the three others are influenced by gravity, are all pushing downwards, wanting to connect downwards, whereas fire goes against the concept of gravity. All the other elements in creation of the world seek to preserve their own existence, whereas fire, the nature of fire is to tear itself away from the wick, wanting to attach itself to the source, which, by the way, the Alter Rebbe explains in this chapter that the source of fire is under the orbit of the moon. It wants to attach itself to its source and ultimately become extinguished. So it's not seeking self-preservation, it's actually seeking annihilation. It's actually seeking to be extinguished, thereby connecting itself to its source. Not only will it be extinguished, but will ultimately lose its identity, because in the source of something, for example, take the sun.
when you have the rays of the sun, when they go out of the sun, so they're independent, we can see them as independent of the sun. But within its source, there's so much sun and light that those individual rays don't even have an identity within the source of the sun. So very similar to fire, where fire seeks always to join its source, which is upwards, which is above the earth, under the orbit of the moon. It does not seek self-preservation. It seeks to extinguish itself and also to lose its identity. So to lose its existence and identity within its source. Okay, so this is very similar to the concept of Mesiras Nefesh, which we started speaking about last week, that because of this hidden love that exists within the soul on the level of Chachma, every Jew, no matter his level, is capable of sacrificing his life for the sake of God. And that is what is known as Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice. But in this case, in this chapter specifically, Tanya is talking about self-sacrifice, meaning dying for the sake of Hashem. There is a type of self-sacrifice, which we're going to get to later on in Tanya, which is living for the sake of Hashem. But in this chapter, this chapter, we are discussing the capability of every Jew to actually give up his life for the sake of Hashem. When a neshama sacrifices itself, when a soul sacrifices itself for godliness, it's actually the nature of the soul. It's not a decision. It's by very nature, the soul cannot separate itself from God. It cannot deny Hashem. It's like an automatic, it's just the nature. The same way as the nature of a flame is to always go upwards, no matter even if you turn it upside down. It's always going upwards to seek connection with its source. And the nature of the soul of a person is also always to seek connection with Hashem. It's not a decision. It's not a logical decision that godliness is better than life. It's not that like the person who is faced with this decision at that moment will say, well, let me think about it. Oh, yes, godliness is better than life. It's not actually a logical decision. Otherwise, it would not be considered true self-sacrifice. It would be considered like a selfish decision, because the person sat down, made a logical decision that this is better for me than life itself. But in this case, it's not actually a decision, but it's just its nature. It's nature to want to leave the body and to cleave to its source, which is Hashem. And thereby, by cleaving to its source and joining together with Hashem, the neshama loses its existence on earth and also loses its identity, because the same way as fire within its source loses its identity, a neshama going back to the source of all neshamas is not different to any other neshama. It doesn't have an identity, whereas here on earth there is a certain identity that it has. And when a Jew acts using this capability of giving up its life for godliness instead of negating God, we are talking about a situation when a Jew is faced with a choice. And we will see in this chapter, is going to explain further, even a Jew is a sinner. When he is faced with that clear choice, negate Hashem or die, he will always choose to die. He will not choose at this moment, in any case, he will not choose self-preservation at this moment, but he will act like the flame of a fire, seeking to extinguish itself to join with its source, because that's its nature. It's not a decision, but it's the nature. It's above logic, and therefore it comes from the level of Chachma. In other words, a soul doesn't become a better soul by leaving the body. It's simply its nature. It cannot remove itself from its nature, and therefore seeks death in this case, rather than negate Hashem. When a Jew, however, going back to the other cases, other types of love, which Alter Rebbe has explained previously, when a Jew develops a love, either by using his intellect or even by having a conviction, meaning a tvuna, it comes from a lower level. We know that there are 3 levels in the intellect: Chachma, Bina, and Das. So Chachma is above rationalization. Bina is then logical. So when you produce a love of Hashem or a love and fear of Hashem by using your intellect, It's coming from the level of bina, not from chachma. And therefore, a mitzvah, which is done with mesiras nefesh, you're completely giving up your desires, and you're having complete self-sacrifice for the sake of Hashem, is actually on a higher level than a mitzvah done with love and fear, which is produced by your own intellect. So that's the interesting part about it. The question is, are we meant to produce love and fear as a result of our intellect? Yes, that is what we usually have to strive for, even though it's limited by our own capacities, and it's on the level, a lower level of bina. That is what we're meant to do. However, in the case where a person does a mitzvah or even dies, sacrifices his life for the sake of godliness, it's actually on a higher level than the love and the fear produced by one's intellect, because it is actually an involuntary devotion to Hashem. It's not something thought through. And it's because of the godliness present in the neshama on the level of chachma, and motivates a person to do a mitzvah without having to contemplate a decision. Now, we're going to develop this further, because the Alter Rebbe is telling us about this hidden love, not just to know that when you're going to be faced with a choice of negating Hashem or dying, then you will choose death. The Alter Rebbe is telling us that because you are able to do that when things are very clear to you, when it becomes absolutely clear, the level of chachma becomes revealed to you that you're able to do it, we're able to also use this capability on a regular day-to-day basis by remembering this capability of the neshama in the case where it's extremely clear. But we're going to explain that further. Because chachma, which is above logic, is the point of contact between the Jew and Hashem. That's where we see godliness. The level of chachma, intellect, sees Hashem. When we are, going about our daily life, godliness is not revealed to us on that level. But on the level of the neshama, on the level of chachma, chachma sees godliness, and that's what causes faith. That's what causes faith, and that's why people can have faith in Hashem without necessarily understanding why. So why is this love normally hidden? Why can't we just access it whenever we need to? Whoops, I don't have a developed love. I didn't use my intellect to produce an emotion. I don't even have a tavuna. Okay, so let me take out of my toolbox this love of Hashem that I inherited from my patriarchs. It's usually hidden. It's usually hidden. Why is it usually hidden? So what happens is that when a rasha, a sinner, right, or someone who is, we're not talking about a bad person necessarily, but someone who is capable of sinning, when he is not being challenged in his faith of God, right? So then he doesn't have to face this choice, either die or, negate godliness. His godly soul is actually exiled or imprisoned within the animal soul, because remember that the rasha, we know that the tzaddik is controlled by his godly soul. The rasha is controlled by his animal soul. In the Beinoni, the animal soul has no power over the body, but it's there, right? But a rasha, a person who's capable of sinning, is controlled by his animal soul, which is primarily found on the left side of the heart. Okay, and this is what we actually mean by the expression, I'm not sure if you've heard it or not, but there's an expression that we say that the Shechina is in Golus. In Aramaic, it's called Shechinta begolusa. The Shechina is in Golus and is in exile. The Shechina is actually the part of Hashem which is present in the neshama. It's the part of Hashem which is here in this world. It is present in the neshama, but this part of the neshama is actually in exile or imprisoned within its own body, and it can't influence at that point the Jew not to sin. When the rasha is being controlled by its animal soul, the Shechina is imprisoned. It's not able to influence the Jew to do contrary to the will of the animal soul. What's interesting is that sometimes we serve Hashem
we actually, not sometimes, most of the time, we serve Hashem. We don't serve Hashem on the level of Mesiras Nefesh. We're not sacrificing our lives for serving Hashem, right? We don't live in times where serving Hashem is prohibited. We don't live in times where every mitzvah we do is a danger, a physical danger to us. When we do mitzvahs on a general basis, we're not doing mitzvahs on the level of Mesiras Nefesh, self-sacrifice, correct? So doing a mitzvah, even though it's a mitzvah and it's good, and Hashem wants us to do that in order to make this world a comfortable dwelling place for Him, right? But when we do a mitzvah, it can be, and I'm not saying it always is, but it can be the opposite of altruism. Because much like conventional love, when you love a person, love has a selfish component. You love a person because it feels good. Sometimes you have a reason why you want to get closer to another person. You like that person because, right? There's a reason. Love is not a completely altruistic emotion, which is, by the way, which is why we actually also need the element of fear in our service of Hashem, because fear is more altruistic. We'll get to that later. But love is not a completely selfless emotion. It can be the reality of the animal soul seeking self-preservation through godliness. Like, I want to live, so I'm going to do mitzvahs for its own benefit. In other words, sometimes, to make that practical, sometimes we do a mitzvah for our own benefit, like it feels good, or maybe we're going to get some honor out of it, or there are many, many different reasons why we do mitzvahs, and they're all good. They're all perfect. We should all continue doing mitzvahs. Don't listen to the Yetzer Hara that says to you, oh, you really shouldn't do this mitzvah because you're seeking honor or whatever it is, right? We should continue to do those mitzvahs. But we have to realize that there is an element of selfishness sometimes in the fulfillment of doing a mitzvah. The only time when there is no sense of self in doing a mitzvah is at the level of chachma, at the level of complete a desire to cleave to Hashem. And it's the nature of the soul. It's not seeking self-preservation. That's why the soul always seeks, that's why the flame of a candle always seeks to go upwards, seeking to cleave to Hashem. The godly soul always wants to cleave to Hashem. But why is it a hidden love? Why is it a hidden love, the selfless love, right? On that level, it's a truly selfless love, this love that we've inherited from our patriarchs. It's not a selfish love. Why is it hidden? Because it's concealed by klipa. The source of the animal soul is klipa and sitra achra, which literally means a shell, a peel, a concealment, and like the other side. The source of the animal soul is not from Kedusha. It's not from the side of revealing godliness. It's from the side of concealment of godliness. And that's why this love is hidden, because it's imprisoned within the body. However, hidden does not mean dead. So at the level of Chachma, one second, at the level of Chachma, where the soul is capable of having self-sacrifice for God, where the soul is capable of a selfless love for Hashem, it's completely altruistic. Klipa has no effect. It doesn't affect that level, that kind of love. But the love is asleep. It's not dead, it's hidden. Much as when we go to sleep, our faculties are not in use. Like, we're not eating, we're not speaking, we're not smelling something, we're not even using our eyes to read. You've gone to sleep and your faculties are not in use. When you wake up, they become in use again, right? So when Chachma is awakened, all behavior changes, and the person, even a sinner, is able to willingly give up his life, because everything becomes very clear at the level of Chachma. At the level of Chachma, everything is clear, but normally it's hidden. But when Chachma is awakened, such as when a person is faced with a choice, negate Hashem or die, then everything becomes clear. And in that moment, he is ready to give up his life for Hashem, right? So it changes the person's behavior with the power of Hashem invested in it. Because at the level of Chachma, that's
where the neshama sees godliness. It doesn't come from the individual. It comes from Hashem. There's no choice. So in actual fact, when a person sins, that's why we say that when a person sins, it's called a ruach shtus, a spirit of folly. It's actually insanity when a person sins, because the true nature of the soul is not to sin. The true nature of the soul is to cleave to Hashem. The true nature of the soul is to want to expire from your body. And we know that our body holds it down here, and the purpose is to do mitzvahs with our body. But the nature of the soul is to want to go higher and higher and connect with Hashem. What happens when a person has a desire to sin? That's when the godly soul is imprisoned within the animal soul, and a spirit of insanity enters the mind of a person because you forget about your connection to God. You're going against your nature. Momentarily, you forget, first of all, about your connection to Hashem. Second of all, you forget about the effect that your sin will have on this connection. You convince yourself otherwise. You convince yourself, oh, that's not so bad. I'll do a sin, I'll go back to connecting to Hashem. You don't realize the effect. So that's why we say it's a spirit of folly which entered the person's mind, which caused him to sin. It's not his nature. The nature of the Jew is to want to connect to Hashem. But when that chachma becomes awakened, it becomes clear to him. It becomes clear to him. So usually we need like a catastrophic event to awaken this chachma, right? And then, oh yes, even if I'm a sinner, it becomes very clear, and a person chooses to give up his life for Hashem. But we can actually contemplate the fact that we are able to do it, and therefore awaken this capability to remember our connection to Hashem. What we can actually say is that the heart of the godly soul is in exile, because the heart of the godly soul is being controlled by the left side of the heart, which is the animal soul. The right side of the heart is imprisoned, is in exile. But the brain of the soul is not necessarily in exile. It is simply asleep, because Chachma is the intellect. It is in the brain. Okay, so now that we know what is the nature of the soul, why it is hidden, what is the element of fear contained within this love? There's an element of fear, even though this love is very altruistic and selfless, etc. The element of fear in this case, in this love, in this hidden love which we seek to awaken, is actually not a fear of sinning. It's not even a repulsion of sin, but it is a fear of detaching oneself from Hashem, which goes deeper than merely sinning. Because when a person has a fear of sin, it also may be selfish, because maybe he's fearing punishment for that sin. So he's seeking self-preservation, and therefore he won't sin. But on the level of Chachma, which is this hidden love which we seek to awaken, the fear which is included in this love is a fear of losing his attachment to Hashem. And he therefore will avoid something which is not only a sin, but he will go so far to avoid something which appears to be a sin. And we have an example in our history which explains this to us very clearly, which is actually the story of Hannah and her 7 sons in the story of Hanukkah. I don't know if you're familiar with that story, but Hannah and her 7 sons were made to bow down to idolatry and refused. They passed the test. This was a case where it was very, very clear, and they gave up their lives for the sake of Hashem. And one by one, they were killed. And then when Antiochus, the Greek king, came to the last son, perhaps a drop of pity was aroused in his heart, and he said to the child, he said, you know what, I'm going to drop my ring, and you bend down on the floor to pick it up, and it will appear as if you are bowing down to idolatry. And even then, the child refused and gave up his life for godliness, because technically that wouldn't have been a sin. And in fact, even if a person could even logically say to themselves, oh, you know, I'll just falsely negate God, but in my heart, I still believe in God. A person is not even capable of doing that. A Jew is not capable of doing that when his chachma level of his soul is awakened, and he's able to awaken this hidden love. not only will he not sin, he won't do anything that appears to be a sin. So again, the upcoming chapters are going to elaborate, are going to develop this theme, but when we think about it, and it doesn't really necessarily need deep contemplation, because remember that this love is not a love which is produced, it is awakened. It's there, it's just dormant. When one reflects upon this capability and love that exists within our soul on the level of Chachma, then we are more cognizant, we're more aware, we're more intentional about not sinning, and we're able to arouse this love, which actually causes us to do mitzvahs on a higher level than simply just producing. Going back to what we said previously, it's not that we shouldn't seek to produce emotions as a result of our intellect. We should, because this love, this hidden love, even if it's awakened, it can be fleeting. For example, let's say a Russia who is a sinner, usually his whole life has been involved in sin, and then suddenly he's he's in a life-threatening position where he has to either negate Hashem or die. And let's say that situation passes, he will go back to his old ways. It doesn't endure unless we then go and develop it and use our intellect and develop these full-fledged emotions. But it is a tool that we can use in our daily lives. Questions, reflections, observations? Okay, I guess everyone's just chewing over the material. You have to unmute yourself, Penina.
Just say thank you. I got to go.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you.
Okay.
Anna.
Yeah.
I mean, it really makes me happy. I don't know, it makes me feel calm.
That's good.
I feel like, okay, you know what? It's there and I don't have to worry about or think about it. I can just let it go. And please, God, don't ever test me. But seemingly by what you're saying, we're all going to pass the test.
No, we're all going to pass the test, but the point is not to wait until we are tested to use this love.
So now, exactly. So that gives you the strength to make to awaken it before and say, I don't want to get to there. Please don't test me, God.
Right.
Or
to simply say, or to simply remember that you don't want to be detached from God. Exactly. You don't want to sever your connection. Because that's why a person sins. They forget about the fact that their sin is going to detach them from Hashem to a certain extent. Obviously, there's always a level where we are always attached to Hashem, but definitely weakens the attachment.
Yeah. Thank you.
So, Hannah, so the way we tap into that is if we just remind ourselves that we don't want to be disconnected from Hashem every time we do something.
Yeah, because otherwise it's a ruach shtus. You're going against your nature. Like it's right. Your nature is to be attached to Hashem. Your soul is like a candle, wants to attach to Hashem. So if you sin, you're actually have a spirit of insanity. That's insane. It goes against the Jew's nature. It's a sin.
I know I had a question earlier, but I think I'll just listen to the recording. I was just trying to. You were explaining the difference of where the source is coming from between contemplating about something and where this is coming from. Chachma Bina or something. I'm going to listen to the recording again.
Right. Well, I could answer it again. It's very short. Basically, when you produce a love of Hashem through your intellect, it's coming from the level of Bina, not Chachma. Chachma is above rationalization. Chachma is the desire to understand, but it's not actually the beginning of understanding. It's above understanding. And Mesiras Nefesh is on the level of Chachma, so it's higher than Bina.
Okay, so
when we re-listen, right?
Okay, when we take our Chachma and we develop it, that turns it into Bina. And this Mesiras Nefesh is coming from Chachma before it even goes into Bina?
Exactly. Mesiras Nefesh, if you have a reason for giving up your life, it's not true Mesiras Nefesh.
Okay. So it's really
Mesiras Nefesh is an involuntary devotion to Hashem. It's not. It's the nature of the Jew. It's
Wow.
not. It's not thought out logically. Should I? Shouldn't I? It's just like above nature, above rationalization, above logic. I'm going to give up my life. I'm not going to preserve my life. I'm going to give up my life for the sake of Hashem. Right? Bina, when we then contemplate and we use our intellect to produce the emotions of love and fear of Hashem, we're using our intellect, our own understanding, so it's certainly limited, but that's what we're required to do, but we're using it to produce an emotion.
Sorry, you got frozen there for a second for me. I apologize. Going into it, so basically the highest level of the serving Hashem is really taking away our ego and doing it from a place of where it's natural, the way we are.
Yes, because at that level, our ego is the nefesh habahamis, is the animal soul. At that level, klipa doesn't affect chachma. The only issue is with chachma is that it's usually asleep.
Got it. So therefore, we have to work on it and we have to develop it. And we
Awaken
do
it,
put our
exactly.
ego in it. We put our ego involved in it because that's what gets us to do the work. And then we can eventually, if we become this level of a tzaddik, we're able to transform that to totally doing
Not
it for the
even,
sake of us.
yeah, our purpose is not to become tzaddikim, actually. That's not our purpose.
Right.
Our purpose is to become Beinoni, whereas we're going to, where we do control the body, so therefore the soul is not so imprisoned by the body, right? On the level of a Russia, that's when the soul is really imprisoned.
But the ego is still always going to be there, even in the level of Beinoni.
Yes, but in the Beinoni, the ego is asleep. That's the thing. He's the only effect that an animal soul has on a Beinoni is its involuntary desires. So the Beinoni does not control the involuntary desires of the animal soul. So it's almost as if the animal soul has a desire and the Beinoni immediately controls that desire. He does not develop the desire. In a Russia who sins or who has the capability to sin, even rarely, that involuntary desire to sin then becomes developed into a plan, into a sin.
So the ego doesn't matter as long as, it matters, but it doesn't matter if it doesn't come into action.
Oh, absolutely. In a Beinoni, it doesn't become into action. He has an ego, which is
Right.
known as the animal soul, right? But it doesn't control him. He controls his mind and therefore controls the ego. In the Russia, the ego controls him. And that's what's considered the Shechina in Golus, like your godly soul is in prison, basically. And that's why, basically, I'm sure I've mentioned this over here. That's why when a person does tshuva is a very joyous occasion. Many people look at tshuva as something really serious and tearful and sorrowful. And yes, we do have to have the aspect of remorse. I'm not taking away from that. But actually, when a person does tshuva, he is liberating his godly soul from the prison of the animal soul. And that is reason for joy, for joy and celebrating.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying. I appreciate it.
That's why we don't approach Chodesh Elul with like trepidation and fear. We're joyous. We're returning to our Father. Like we're returning the soul to its source, basically. We're liberating it. Okay, ladies. So Emir Hashem, next week, hopefully I will be in New York already. So I will be giving the class from New York on New York time. So see you all next week.
Huge mazel tov.
Thank you. I will actually post the invitation on the group. I'm going to do that today. If anyone is in the vicinity of Crown Heights on the day, I would love to see you on Lag Boimer.